Hello, hello. Hey guys, this is Rick. About to give you a rundown on a new story. It's not very new at all. It's called The Girl Without Hands. It's very rough sounding type of a fairy tale that you would tell your children. And of course, it's just mixed up with the code all through and through. But what I wanted to draw your attention to, because this is lending an ear to this, I wanted to go over a few details of symbolism. Basically, in order to be cooked, in order for us to be, brought up, they talk about us being, we're going to be sacrificed, we're going to be burned, we're going to be cooked, we are going to be eaten and stuff like that, right? So what you have to understand is that we become, in order to get to this place, we have to go gather firewood for the fire to keep the hearth going, and this wakes up the girl, the female side that comes in and answers what it is that you were wanting, and it creates the three, 1, 2, and 3. Now, the 3 runs rampant in the story. Always do they run rampant, and when they come together in a lot of ways, it becomes a 6. All right, and then all of a sudden 7s are introduced, and so you recognize that there's a little room that we always come to between the 6th and the 7th floor. There's a little room that's generally called out for this crossing. Water is a very important thing, whereas, like if you put holy water on the devil, it's supposed to stop him from body. What it means, it's the second phase of consciousness. As you climb the ladder and get to the nothingness, this is the time when when the devil would come in knocking and then offer you something. And in Jesus' case, he said no, but still there was a knocking at this particular point in the scheme of the story. No different was it going to be in this story, that this man who's becoming poor by the day, and poor in these stories means that he's losing his connection with the Lord. He's losing his connection. All right, that's what poor means. So when you hear that things are being held for the poor and stuff like that, he's going to open their eyes. He's going to lift them from the dead, because poor people are people that are missing God, and God refers to people that are not connected to Him as being quite dead, widows. And of course, he blames the Pharisees and the clergy, the religious people, for making widows out of his children, and not only making widows of them, but going and robbing their house. So this idea of this house is, the house is inside of you, and when you're going into God's house, then you're going in to the kingdom of God is within you. So you're going into your house, you're going into the Lord's house, the God's house. So you're not going into a church. None of this has anything to do with the outside. And that's, of course, what we've been talking about. This here's a nice little story. You can take it as you want from the outside, but I wanted you to listen to it from what it tells us, for what it means from on the inside of these stories. And what we'll get out of here is we'll find that as this guy was growing poor, he was going out into the wilderness to collect wood. So when people are going into the wilderness, this is when they're going into meditation. They're going to collect wood so they can light the fire, all right? And of course, this runs through the Old Testament big time. This is, Dad, to his father, what's his name, Abraham. I got the wood strapped to my back, but I don't see the sacrifice anywhere. And of course, Isaac means laughter, so it's coded meaning he's the one that's going to be killed. He's the firstborn. Of course, we all knew that. All right. So anyways, while he is out in the middle of the woods gathering wood, a strange man comes up to him and asks him, "What are you doing there? What pains you so much to do this? If you give me what's standing behind your mill, I can bring riches to you beyond belief." And the miller, this is the other thing, he's a miller, grinder, stone grinder, so it's all about, milling, What happens is that he has only two things left in his belongings, and that's the mill and an apple tree that stands just behind the mill. And of course he thought, maybe it's the apple tree he's talking about. Sure. All right, that's it. So, sure, I'll sign it off to you. Signed it off. The stranger kind of laughed in a little way, a little mocking, little laugh. Says, I'll come and get what's mine in 3 years. So anyways, the miller made it home. All right. He just saw his wife. She was in the house, and her house was filled with riches. She says, "Where did all this stuff come from?" And all of a sudden, all of the boxes and all the chests are just full of things, And she goes, "And who brought them in here?" She goes, he says, "Well, I'll tell you the truth, I got them from the strange guy out in the wood there." And he says that if I were to give him, and certainly we could afford to give away our apple tree, but if we could give what was standing behind the mill, it'd be perfect, Certainly that's not bad. And she says, "Oh, husband, it wasn't the apple tree he was after, it was our daughter. She just happened to be sweeping the lawn behind it. She was what he was wanting." Oh my God. So he's given away his firstborn to the devil. Well, she has her own little mind to this, all right? She was a pious girl. Her job was nothing but serving the Lord. And she did it all the time, every day, all the time, and she lived this pious life. And when the third year was up, this guy came to come and drag her ass to his home. She bathed herself, made herself lily white and clean, and she made a little circle of chalk around her. When the devil came, he couldn't get near her. She was just too pure and too clean. And he's mad and he's angry. He yells to the miller and he says, "Cut off all the water from her, unless I can't even get close to her. I can't get control unless she becomes unclean." So he's afraid. He does what he's told to do, cuts all the water off of her. So that night, she cries and cries and cries and cries and cries, and she weeps over her hands, and of course makes her clean as anything. And second day comes about and he can't get her again. "Cut her hands off," he says. "Unless I can get to her. I cannot have no power over her unless she is unclean. She cannot keep her away from the water." He says, the miller says, how can I chop off the hands of my own child? He says, "I don't know, but you're going to do it, or I'm going to come and take you away." Scared to death, he goes to her and he says, I was threatened by the devil. He's going to cause this to happen, and out of my grief, I told him I would do it. Oh, daughter, help me. Forgive me for having to do things that bring pain to you. And so she said to him, she goes, Father, I'm your child. You do with me as you wish. And she held out her hands, and he cut them off. She cried and cried and cried all night long into her stubs, so much so that when the devil came the next morning again, she was so clean and so lily white that he lost all power and all control. And he went about his way. And so, as it comes down to it, her father comes up and says, "Oh, yay, look, I I've magnified 3 times because of what you've done. You know, I'll always hold you in great esteem. And she's like, what? She goes, I got to get the hell out of here. I'm gone. Right? And so she set out on her own. She bound her hands behind her back, and she took off through the woods. And she waited till I guess the story goes is that she waited until sunrise, and she took off, and she walked all day long. And she came to this beautiful field of trees, but it had a water moat around it. And she's so hungry she hadn't had a bite to eat all day long. She put down on her knees, and she asked the Lord, for some help. The Lord sent down an angel. The angel made a dam across the water and allowed her to walk through and into the garden. And as she did so, the angel went with her, and she, with her mouth, ate an apple, or ate one of the pears. It's just one she was looking for. She found a beautiful pear tree. So as she chomped on this, a gardener who was tending to the garden saw this going on. And of course, this was probably around midnight, is how the story goes. She only ate but the one. That's all she wanted. There was no more. And then she laid down under the bushes for some rest. And of course, the king who owned this beautiful little garden came to it the next day, and he counted, and he looked, and he says, one of the pears is gone. So he asked the gardener, what has happened here? What happened to it? And he told him, he said, well, the spirit came into the field last night, and there was this angel that parted the way for him, and she ate a pear, and then she went off into the wilderness and disappeared. This is so, I want to see this for myself. I'll come out tonight and I'll check it out with you. So he brought a preacher along with him as night fell, and the preacher was supposed to be the one that talked to the spirit. So as night fell, and just as sure as that, she slithered out from behind the bushes, and she came out with that little angel beside her. And she reached up and she ate one of those pears again with just her mouth, her hands tied behind her back. Says, this is that no-handed creature you were talking about, that spirit. And so the preacher goes and checks it out and says, hey, what's up? Are you from heaven? Are you spirit? Or are you, from earth? Are you human? She says, well, I'm immortal. She says, I'm immortal, but I've been forsaken by all but God. Says, I'm forsaken by all but God. And he says, well, if that is true, then what if you were with me? I would not forsake you. He looked upon her. She's just so beautiful. So he took her home, married her, and gave her some silver hands. Just so beautiful. All right? So next thing you know, about a year or so later, she has a baby. But before that happens, he is called off to war, as kings do all those times. He's called off, and he asked his mother to watch over his young queen. And if she was to go to bed, if she was to be to bed about having children and stuff like that he was to be notified by letter as soon as possible. And he took off. And of course, it was just about a little bit later that she gave birth to a little boy. And his mother, this poor mother, was just so interested in having, telling her son about this beautiful baby boy. So she got set out to write a nice little letter, and she found a messenger, and she sent him off along his way. Well, this messenger stopped about halfway there, stopped by a creek, fell asleep. And while he fell asleep, the devil, who's always wanted to get back to this little queen, says, I'm going to fix this, and replace the letter with something else. So when he got to the king, revealed the letter said that the queen had given birth to a changeling. That's what it said in one of the stories, but it's really a monster of some kind. And he was shocked, and he was like, oh my God, oh my goodness, but he Still, he wrote back and he said, I want you to take care of them until I return home. So anyways, he gave the letter back to this guy, and of course he came to the same place, the same little brook, and the devil came and switched letters with him again. And of course this one says, when she opened up and the old woman opened it up, she found it says that you're to kill the queen and her son. Fearing this, she just absolutely couldn't believe this. No, she could not take and put these two innocent people to death. She just couldn't. So she wrote him again and again, and she wasn't hearing from him. But then one of the letters came back and it says, not only do you want to kill her, I need to have a token to show that you've obeyed me. And so I want you to take and pull out her eyes and cut out her tongue. And I want you to preserve those for me until I return. It just totally freaked her out. She just couldn't do it one bit at all. So secretly, she called on a doe to be delivered to her home. She cut its eyes out and its tongue, and she put them away. And of course, she gathered the young queen and the child. She says, I could not do as the king had asked me to do. I just absolutely couldn't kill you. He's so angry with you. But you can't stay here. You have to go. And so she took the child and she tied it to the back of her back, to this woman's back, and sent her off into the woods, and she went home crying and weeping so. As the young queen was walking around in the wilderness, she was just besides herself. What am I going to do about this? So she fell to her knees, she prayed to God. God delivered an angel to her side, who led her to this little house that says all are welcome to dwell here free. When she got to this to this place, a beautiful woman in white clothes came out of the building and said, oh, my queen, how is it that you come to be here? And ushered her into the building. Then, of course, she says, how did you know that I was the queen? And he says, I've been sent by God to watch over you and your child. And so they all three in this little house stayed together for 7 years. When that 7 years was going on, at the same time, finally, her husband, the king, finally came back home from war. And the first thing he wanted to see more than anything on earth was to see his wife and his child. And of course, the old woman was there, and she cried bitterly. She goes, oh, what an evil man you were, to make me kill the innocent boy and this innocent girl. And she showed him the letters, and like, oh my God, I never said anything like this. And then didn't say that, but then she held out the eyeball and the tongue, and this just totally freaked the man out. He says, oh my God. And he wept and he wept and he wept and he wept more than she did. And she was like, I'm not so sure. She goes, listen, hey, be careful. Peace be still, peace be your heart, or what have you. He says, I didn't do it. She's alive and the child is alive. I've set them out into the world on their own. That was like 7 years ago. He says, I'll try to find her. I'll find her no matter what it takes. I'm going to find her. I'll go to the highest part of the skies to find her. So as he's out, he sets off and he says, I will not eat nor drink until I find her. I've just got to find my wife and my child. So for 7 years he searches, and for 7 years he didn't eat. He was being sustained by God through this whole time. And when he finally got to this one particular place, he found this house, and it had a sign on it that says, anyone can dwell here for free. And of course, this beautiful woman came out in white clothes, and she said, oh, my king, how is it that you came about this? And he says, well, I've been traveling for about near 7 years, looking for my wife and my child, and I've not found them. I'm afraid that I can't find him. And so she brings him in, and she tries to ask him for some food and some water. And he's, no, I just want to rest. So she laid them down into this one room, and she went into the other chamber, the queen's chamber, where she was sitting with her child on her lap. And she says, "Queen, bring your child. Your husband has arrived." She gets up and she goes and checks this out. Well, when he laid down and he put a handkerchief over his face. That's what they said before. I just need to rest. And as he rested, he put a handkerchief over his face. Okay. She and the baby show up, and as they do this, he says, "This is your father?" And he says, "How can I have a father? I have no father in this world. You told me my father is up in heaven. That's what you told me, and I pray, oh God who art in heaven. This is what I've been told. This is what I follow. Surely this is not mine. I don't know this wild man." But she says, "Take and put the veil." So while this was going on, the handkerchief slipped off of his face. And she says, "Son, put your veil back over your father's face." So he picked the veil up and he put it back over the face. And of course, the father, hearing this stuff, who called him a wild man and stuff like that, delighted in that he let the mask fall off one more time. Now this irritated the kid, and the kid says, "How can this be my dad? This wild man is my dad?" And he woke up. When he heard this, he stood up and he says, "Yes." He says, "Who are you? Who are you guys?" And of course, during her time there, in those seven years that she spent in this little house, she was restored. Her hands grew back. And of course, the way it goes is he says, "Who are you?" "My wife. When I last saw my wife, she had silver hands, and you have natural hands." And she says, "Yeah, well, good Lord restored me back to health." And at the same time, the little angel took off to the next room and brought back the little silver, hands. And of course he says, "This is my wife. This is my wife. And of course, this is my son. I've never met my son." And they ran off together, and they lived happily ever after. And you'll find, let me see if I got it right. The king heard this, and he got up and he asked who they were. Then she said, "I am thy wife, and that is thy son, Sorrowful." And he saw her living hands and said, "My wife had silver hands." She answered, "The good God has caused my natural hands to grow again." And the angel went into the inner room and brought the silver hands and showed them to him. Now he knew for certain that this was his dear wife and his dear child. And he kissed them and was glad and said, "A heavy stone has fallen from my heart." The angel of God gave them one meal with her, and then after that they went home to the king's aged mother. There were great rejoicings everywhere, and the king and the queen were married again and lived contentedly till their very end. Sweet. That's how it goes, Once you make this connection, things go really, really good. It's the same kind of story. There was a lot of interest in there, this not eating and not drinking, this fast. I'm not going to do this until I get there. That number 7, not eating, having her hands grow back, because she was in there for 7. She made it 7. 7 is restoration, completion. 8 becomes her restoration. Of course, they all fed together, The angel let them feed from her once and then took her back. The way the story winds up, it really winds up being, it's like this, it's this old, the poor woman. She winds up being the one that's having the story being told, all right? It's just interesting how that would wind up at the end, because she's the poor old woman, but she actually happens to be the mother of the king So you have to understand that that means that she's the one that was looking for the spiritual base. And they went home and they found her. You know, it's like in the other story, whenever the king and the queen from the frog story made it together, it was his companion, it was the chauffeur, it was his, his messenger. That was all a fright, and as if he went through the whole thing all on his own. So you would see that that's how that story ended. It was really him that went through all of this, and it's just this wonderful story. And so it's talking about the stages of consciousness and the barrier of water that keeps both us on one side or the other side of this promised land. You have to part the water to get over into this place and then to eat of this fruit. So you could see that that was just totally Old Testament from one part of it to the other. And it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. I love you guys. Hope the best for you. Our Comcast comes off and on and off and on, so I know it's been off most of the day today, so let's see if I can get this thing on or not, alright? But anyways, I love you guys, and I hope you lend an ear to that story. If you had any questions, let me know, and we'll talk about it, It's always some kind of discussion if you like, alright? Because not always just my way, we could talk about it, Alright, so anyways, best to y'all. See you later.